World champion Garry Kasparov is famous for being one of the great attacking players of all time. In this game, played in 1981, he's still 4 years away from becoming world champion. Against the great positional strategist Ulf Andersson, he shows that time and initiative can overrule a great positional plan. Kasparov begins with d4, and after Andersson's response with the Queen's Indian defense, we get pawn to a3. Now, this is the Petrosian system. It's one that Kasparov has made famous, and it even is sometimes called the Kasparov system or the Kasparov variation because of his efforts to make this into a very effective opening weapon. And he's had tremendous success and won multiple amazing games, including this one in this opening line. Andersson now responds by developing his bishop and then playing knight to e4. This move already seems to set Andersson off on a dangerous path. Some have said that this isn't really the mistake yet, but I think it probably already is a major opening mistake. The problem is that after the trade of pieces, and I kind of think that Andersson was trying to play a variation that specifically sought trades against the young attacking player Kasparov, Andersson is losing time. And now the move knight d2 is played. This is an excellent move. It might look suspicious to many of you because we're moving a piece backwards in the opening. We're moving a piece twice in the opening. But we're gaining time by hitting the bishop, and we're gaining control over e4. In basically all d4 openings, the battle revolves around e4, and white just won that battle here, which is going to give white a nice advantage. So if the bishop were to go to b7, we would just step forward, seize our space, and we're doing very, very well. Now, it's not like we won, and this is probably better than what Andersson did, but it's a nice position for white. Instead, Andersson plays the move bishop to g6. Now, we could play e4, but we actually are going to change tacks here, and I think we have a better move. Kasparov does play pawn to g3. When your opponent makes a move, you should ask yourself, what did they just leave exposed? Like, every move changes the dynamic on the board and often leaves something exposed that wasn't exposed on the previous move. Here, the bishop retreat exposes the long diagonal. Kasparov immediately picks up on that and immediately acts to exploit it by simply developing his bishop. So, we now get knight c6 attacking the pawn. Pawn is defended. Pawn a6 preparing b5, which is probably too slow, even if it might be good positional play. And here we get pawn to b4. b5 is followed through on. And after a trade, we do notice here that it's not possible for Kasparov to take on b5 because of knight takes b4. There's a pin on the a file, and this does release some of the pressure. Black is very happy to have traded some important central pawns for white and reduced white's spatial advantage. So instead, the better move, rather than taking on b5, is simply to develop the bishop to b2. By defending the rook on a1, we eliminate the pin, and our b4 pawn is defended, and now b5 is really under attack. So Andersson plays knight to a7, and I love this move. It's a bad move, but I love it. And at this point, there's not really a great alternative, so I shouldn't say that this is even a mistake. The move knight a7 looks terrible because you're pulling the knight away from the center. You're sticking it in a corner on a7. This is unfortunately true, and this move is just too slow. But strategically, the idea of pulling the knight back, trying to play d5 and c6, and then swinging the knight around to c8, and then eventually onto d6 or b6, and then a square like c4 or e4, is a great idea. If I gave black 5 moves in a row and Andersson was able to do this, this would be wonderful. Black would be much, much better in this position, and white's bishops would be totally stymied. The catch is, I just said, if I gave black 5 moves, of course, we're not going to do that, and there's no way Kasparov is going to do that. This move is too slow, and Kasparov shows why right away. After knight a7, we get h4, which threatens to trap the bishop on g6. And after h6, we get pawn to d5, a brilliant positional pawn sacrifice, one of my favorite positional pawn sacrifices. This was already good if you hadn't played h4 yet, but the inclusion of h4 is a very nice inclusion. We'll see why that exposes some more squares on the king side later in the game. Pawn d5 is a pawn sacrifice that frees this bishop and hits the g7 pawn. That's going to make it very hard for the bishop on f8 to develop, which also makes it very hard for black to castle. In addition, the bishop is just getting life, right? So we're creating specific tactical problems for black, but also the bishop is just a monster even if black solves those specific tactical problems. And I want to mention that after black takes on d5, which black does, the e4 move, which we'll see prepared and eventually exploited, is going to open the e file, and given black's problems with castling, that is just going to be a death sentence in this position. So after this excellent pawn d5 move and the capture on d5, bishop g2 is played, hitting the pawn on d5. That's defended by pawn to c6, and Kasparov castles. I really like the castling move here too. Too often I have young attacking-minded players who will avoid playing moves like castling in positions like this because they want to conduct the attack with the pieces that they already have to hand. This is not usually the correct approach. You can't win a game with 4 pieces. You should castle and get your king out of the center and include your rooks in a case like this. Every position is different, but I really think that many attacking players would benefit from castling and focusing on the rooks before they try to finish an assault that just isn't fully cooked yet. So castles, and black tries pawn to f6 here, trying to stymie the bishop on b2 so we can move his bishop and castle. We get rook to e1. Pawn e4 immediately was also good, but I really like rook e1. Again, thinking about getting those heavy pieces in, not rushing the attack. The bishop now goes to e7, queen g4. Moves come with a gain of time right here. Black plays king to f7, defending the bishop. Pawn to h5, another move with gain of time that's really exploiting some of these soft light squares on the king side. And then pawn to e4. The move has finally been prepared, and as said, we're opening the e-file, and that's all kinds of trouble for black in this position. So after e4, the pawn can't be tolerated. Black does try to capture it, and we do bishop takes e4. One thing I like about this move is when you're attacking, never forget the value of exchanging. A lot of players don't really consider exchanging at all as an attacking idea, but when you exchange important defending pieces, your attacking pieces often become stronger. Here, this piece is really doing a lot to hold together those light squares for black, and the exchange of that bishop is really going to help white out in his attacking conduct here. So after bishop takes on e4, we get a trade here, and then the knight tries to get back to c8. It's too slow, but of course we would like to get the knight back, and I don't have a better suggestion. At this point, we're ready to bring the other rook in with a gain of time, hit the pawn on d7. The rook defends. You could also try pawn d5, check the notes to see why that doesn't work. And now it's time to finish the game. There are, in this position, and earlier in the game and later in the game, many ways to win the game. So I'm really going to focus on the way that Kasparov did win the game. So check out the notes, have a look at Stockfish if you want to try out some other ideas. There are lots of other ideas that work, but we're going to focus on the way that Kasparov did it, which is very beautiful and logical. Pause your video if you want to try to figure out what he played in this position. So he strikes now with knight takes f6, 2 exclamation marks, really a beautiful move that completely crushes the black position, and it's a nice forcing move. When you can calculate to the end in a position like this, you want to try to force the game rather than playing strong moves that don't really knock your opponent out right away. So after knight takes f6, the knight is captured. We get queen g6 check, king f8, another good moment to pause your video if you want to try to figure out what comes next. And we get bishop to c1 right here, attacking h6. This is a really good example of how in a position like this, you can often play a slow move and kind of switch the wing of your attack, right? We're kind of focused on one target here, but we can take a moment to pull back with a quieter move and attack another sensitive target, and our opponent, who's stretched to the brink in defense, often can't respond to that. So when you're attacking and when your opponent is stretched, watch for opportunities like this to kind of switch your focus a little bit and hit a point that they're not ready to defend. I also want to talk about Kasparov's ability here to stretch his opponent's defenses by splitting them up. In this game and some other famous games from this era, we see that Kasparov managed to conduct a sacrificial attack that was kind of slow, right? He didn't After sacrificing, immediately just knock black out with hammer blows. He's going to follow up with some slower moves like bishop c1 and some other moves we're going to see. But because black's forces are split, what matters is that Kasparov is ahead in attacking versus defending pieces around the black king, and you consistently see him exploit that kind of advantage in games like this in this era in Kasparov's career. So with h6 hit right here, black tries pawn to d5, opening up the 7th rank so that the rook can try to defend. Kasparov brings the rook in with rook d4. Again, I love these patient moves. These pieces are such dominant attacking pieces. He doesn't need to settle too early. He can keep bringing in the pieces and overwhelming black. Knight back, the rook comes over, threatening queen to g7, which is devastating. The knight tries to go to f7. There's no better move, and we get bishop takes h6 check. A really nice little finish. So after bishop takes h6, of course the bishop can't be captured by the rook because of queen to g8 and checkmate. Also, if the knight tries to capture, you simply have queen g7, and a lot of material is falling for black, and white wins easily. So after bishop takes h6, Andersson does try one other move. He tries moving the king over to e8. He is still up a piece after all. It seems early to resign, but he does resign after bishop to g7. The rook on h8 is hit, and if the rook moves, simply pushing the h-pawn is going to cost black a ton of material. At this point, Stockfish is saying that white is up like +9 or +10, and the game is really out of Andersson's hand. This is the correct moment to resign. So I hope that you enjoyed this game by Kasparov and enjoyed all of his brilliant attacking moves before and after his sacrifices to get to the black king. If you want to check out more games from great players like Fischer or Carlsen, check out our playlist, and also check out our playlist for opening traps and brilliant moves.